is the Stripology ruler. This is another big ruler. This ruler has an eyelet right here so that you can get the rotary blade on the inside. Clear numbering. Use the square and a star to cut consistent sizes. And it tells you right there that you can cut 2.5 inch strip cuts and 1.5 inch by using the star, using the square for 2.5 inch cuts. So we're going to go through that. So again, these are individual slots. But let's take a closer look at this. So each one of these sections has that grip system on it, on the bottom. Do you see this white square? This white square is 10 inches. That's our pre-cut size. There are a lot of patterns out there that use a 10-inch square. So if you have yardage, you can use this to cut it into that 10 inches. So that's something to note. There's also a dotted dashed 1/4 inch line just outside this first zero. This is where you get your clean edge. But you can also do 1/4 inch increments like 2 1/4 inch binding strips. That's another option. Okay. On the bottom, again, we can do a 1/2 inch cut, whole inch, another half, etc. And you can use this square and star system to create 1.5 inch cuts and 2.5 inch cuts. Let's take a look at how that works. Okay, so we're going to take fabric, and it still has the salvage on it. It's been folded once and then it's been folded twice. Now you want to make sure that the fabric, when it's folded, is not going past these teardrops, because then the blade will not cut the fabric. So often we will fold our fabric and only bring these up to, we'll leave a little gap here, and you don't want to do that actually. You want to fold them as close together as possible so that you can have enough space between this teardrop and this one here. Okay? That's a key thing. So let's put this underneath. You always want to have excess fabric to the left of the zero so that you can start with a clean edge when you put the blade through the zero. You're going to line up this first line where it says number 2. There's number 2 over here. And then you're going to have the 0 with some fabric to the left of the 0. So you line up the fold here, and then you're going to check up here to make sure that this is parallel. And it is. It's parallel here and it's parallel there. If it's not, then you have to refold your fabric. Then you want to slightly slant your blade, place it in first, then cut. I didn't hear it cut all the way through, so I'm going to do it one more time. Okay. Now, if I want to do 2.5 inch strips, all I have to do is look for the square. I'm going to use the square down here. So here's the first one at 0. The next square is at 2.5. So here's the next square. And then I look for the next square. Another 2.5 inch strip. So now I've cut 2 2.5 inch strips. This is left over, 2.5, and 2.5. Bring this in here. I didn't catch that. I know I didn't hear it cut earlier. I'm going to turn this. And there's a reason why sometimes it won't cut. It depends on how you're holding the blade. Okay. All right, so here's a little lesson about when you're cutting. If you notice the blade, there's more blade here at the top than on the sides. So if I start like this, I'm using the biggest part of the blade. But sometimes what will happen is that you'll go like this, you'll put it in, and you'll start with the biggest part of the blade, and then your hand will do that. And now it's not gonna cut through all of the fabric. It's only gonna cut through maybe the first couple of layers. I had 4 layers of fabric there, and so that's what happened. I should have kept my hand up so that all that larger part of the blade is going to go through all sections of the fabric. If you go like this, you're going to get the biggest part of the blade to cut through all the fabric. When you do this, you're not going to get through all the fabric if you bring your hand down. So keep it up, keep going. Do not do this. Okay? You don't want to start up here and then go down, because then you're not going to get all the layers. You want to keep your hand in the same position to use the biggest part of the blade. Okay, so after we've cut those 2.5-inch strips, we can use the 45-degree line to make diamonds, or we can subcut. So let's see if we subcut this into 2.5-inch squares. So we can just turn this down, bring the salvage to this side, line it up with our cutting mat. Then we bring in our ruler, and then we make sure we line up one of the lines right along the edge of the strip. When you line up one, the second one should line up if it's lined up correctly. If it isn't, then you just remove the ruler and you adjust. This is the last cutting part right here. Here's my 0, and everything looks lined up. I see a little bit off here. Now, I would normally press the strips out so I don't have that fold. Because that doesn't lay completely flat, but for demo purposes, I'm not going to do that at the moment. So now I want to cut this into 2.5-inch squares. I start with the 0, and I look for the square. And square, so you don't have to say 1.5, 2.5, you just look for the squares, because these are common sizes, 1.5 and 2.5. Okay. So just like that, you have all these 2.5-inch squares, and then this is the waist. That's the waist, and these are all 2.5-inch squares. So that's a basic introduction to the Stripology ruler. There's so much more you can do with it. It's the same things that I just did with cutting the strips, sub-cutting into squares, into rectangles, but you also get ways to square off blocks. So right away, can you see those black squares? These are whole increments. If you need to square something off that's 3 inches square, 4 inches square, etc., etc., that's what the black squares are. When you want to square off something that's a 1/2 inch increment, you're going to use the white squares in the center. See that white square in the center? White square, and then you can use the horizontal and vertical line also to square it off, to help you in squaring it off. And you can use the diagonal. See those dashed diagonal lines? That also is going to help you square off your block. Here's your 4.5 for squaring off. Then here's your 6.5. It's white. All the way up to 12.5 inches to square off a 12.5 inch square block. Dash lines down the center. I can put that white dash line right down this block and on either side to line it up, vertical and horizontal as well. So all of your seams are going to be lined up so that you can square this off perfectly. Now, what can be confusing about this is that you're like, okay, well, how do I trim it? I can't go this way. That's because you have to do left and right or right and left first, then turn the block and do the other two sides. So you do two sides at a time. So, and you'll see the numbers. There's 8.5 here and there's 8.5 here. So this was already trimmed, 8.5 right here. If I was doing, say, 6.5, I would see 6.5 on this side and 6.5 on this side. Here you can see the 6.5 on this side, and then when you scoot over to the other side, you're going to see 6.5. So you're going to cut on that side, and then you're going to cut on this side. Then you rotate the block and you repeat the same thing. Or you can use a rotating mat. Bringing a rotating mat, that way the block stays in position. You line everything up. So you would cut and cut, then you'd rotate it and bring this back and do the same thing. Line everything up on the diagonal, down the center, and then you'd cut and cut. So 4.5 all the way up to 12.5. 2 Stripology rulers,